and the tallow or the fat from the animal. I did not know that because it didn't have any way to preserve the meat. So unless you killed it and ate it right then, the meat would spoil. And so 250,000 head of cattle every year driven up that way. And of course, a lot of them originally were driven this way because the first railhead that they could get to was in Missouri. Then Missourians didn't like it because some of the cattle down there brought disease that their cattle weren't immune to, and so they pushed them further across. But I always wondered, how'd they keep them alive? But when you had grass like that and no trees, and like I said, when I had that insurance business, the guy came in with pictures from around Tahlequah. Not a tree one. Those hills are just grass, green grass. And so it's hard for us to imagine, but our world has changed in that regard. So, like I say, yeah, and I would just want to say thank you to all of you with the cards and the well wishes, Facebook and everything. I thank you. Thank you. It was a nice service. It was good to see. And, with my brother-in-law and my sister, his daughters being there with him for the 2 or 3 weeks before she passed was really good because they all understood. And so it's a good situation. And just thank you for your prayers. Okay. As we look at this a little bit, we know that I just want to go through and just real quick kind of rehash some things. So we know that Rebekah came from Paddan Aram, all right, which is Iran. So when we think about, and especially in the last few weeks, that they're all kin folks, literally blood relatives, makes no sense. It's hard to imagine why in that regard. But Rebekah, like Sarah, was barren. She couldn't have children. So we know that she also was the daughter of Bethuel, which was Abraham's nephew. Okay? She was the sister of Laban. Laban, we'll find out, get more into him in just another few chapters right here. That Laban does, he's the one that's doing the bargaining in this relationship, kind of, as Rebekah is passed from her family, in this case, to be the wife of Isaac. And, of course, she is from Iran. Then we find that Isaac prayed on behalf of his wife. Now, we said that Isaac was 40 when he married, and Rebekah was barren for 20 years. So Isaac's at the age of 60. And God answers that prayer, as God does. And then Rebekah conceived. Now then, here's where the story gets interesting. Too many times we put these stories of the Old Testament in this bucket and put it up on the shelf because we think it's not relevant. Let me ask you a question. What's the day of judgment like? What's the day of judgment like? What did God say it was going to do? Did God say he would judge, or did he send Jesus? He sent Jesus, right? And Jesus recognizes those that are his. Do we have an example of that anywhere? What about Sodom and Gomorrah? Were those cities evil? How many men showed up to talk to Abraham? How many of them went on to Sodom and Gomorrah? God can't be in the presence of evil. When they went there, what did they try to do to these men? Did they recognize them? When Lot ask on their behalf and they were there? Did they try to treat them with respect, or what did they do? Did they reject Jesus? Yeah. Holy Spirit did what? Caused them to go blind. Power of God. Wasn't just one man, it was all of them that were there. Until Lot, who was performed an act as righteous, could get out. Is that not Judgment Day? Is he not giving us an example of what judgment is like? Brothers and sisters, when God says that Jesus talks about that there is a hell, you tell me what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. He's giving us an example of what Judgment Day will be like. We need to make sure that we understand. We teach this, but we don't realize it. I don't think that we put enough emphasis on it. I'm not really sure that we even believe it sometimes when we say that, well, the Old Testament is for us to learn from. Well, what did we learn? That God is faithful to his word. We say that a man's only as good as his word, right? It used to be an old expression. I don't know if anybody uses it anymore, but I remember my granddad would say, a man's only as good as his word. If you don't keep your word, then what do you believe from that individual? God keeps his word. So as he comes down now, we've got Isaac. Isaac has prayed. God keeps his word. He gives him, but there's 2 children. They're struggling inside. And I can't imagine, because I don't know, and ladies, I don't even try to pretend or anything else, but this must have been a miserable pregnancy. Because Rebecca prays to God and kind of like, what in the world is going on in here? Lord, these 2 are wrestling. Please help me. What? There's something that was very, I'm just, like I say, once again, I have absolutely no idea, but I'm sure that what she was feeling had to be very abnormal. And so she prays about this. Now then, this one came to me too. Who are the 2 babies that are in the womb? Jacob and Esau. Now think about how you said that. Because this goes back to what happens with the birthright and everything else as well. Who do we normally, if this was in the Jewish custom and understand, who would be first? Esau and Jacob. But because of what happens in this story, now then, so they're wrestling. Is this the only time Jacob gets in a wrestling match? No, he does this later on. Last year at Locust Grove, the only time in my life I've ever coached wrestling, and I didn't coach anything, trust me. I drove the bus, made sure they were and would sit there and I did learn a few things, but when you think about this, Jacob then has a wrestling match later on in this regard. So it's just one of those things that kind of steps up. And then Rebecca, of course, Rebecca's asked this question. Why? Why is this such a pregnancy? Why is this so difficult? I want us to also think with that, and it goes back to the idea, and we talked a little bit about this before, that when God answers prayer, He doesn't just put it on a silver platter and deliver it that way, does he, like a waiter, and bringing it to your table and setting it down so that you have a nice... Or is there sometime conflict involved with God's answer of a prayer? We looked at the idea of what relationship that Abraham had with Isaac after that time, because it talks about that he apparently was with his mother a lot because he sent to get Rebekah so that it would console his son, because he, we look at the relationship between Abraham and Ishmael and what happened in that. Sometimes things are not easy. This wasn't easy for Rebekah. She's asking why. Yes, she wanted to have children, and now then she has this difficult time, and she's trying to figure things out. So Rebekah goes to the Lord. The Lord answers. And not only does he answer, but I think that it's kind of, we talk about English, and I don't know a whole lot about English, okay? I'm not trying to stand up here and tell you I'm an English teacher or anything like that, because there's so many different things that can... No. You can change I before E, except after C, except sometimes, and all kinds of rules that don't fit sometimes. But this is in quotations. In the Bible, God's answer is in quotations. I think that brings, because they specifically want to understand. The Lord says, 2 nations are in your womb. Okay? Now then, let's recognize one of those nations will become Israel. The other nation will become Edom. But wait a minute, didn't he also promise Ishmael that he would become a great nation? So now then we got how many? And then not only that, but did he not declare that the sons of Ishmael, which there were 12 of them, kind of like the 12 tribes of Israel, and that each one of them... Now then, if I'm the human part, so I'm thinking right here, and it's like, oh, wow, God, why would you do that? Why didn't you just make your nation the good one, and just, why did you make that pride? Why? See, in my human form, there's some things God does that doesn't make sense to me. Makes sense to God, because he's got the plan. Sometimes we don't have to understand completely, but what we want to do is follow that thread. And sometimes we don't do that enough, I think, when we study in the Old Testament. The reason why I said what I did a while ago about some things, that we need to study it as one book, the Bible. Let's quit separating it into old and new, and let's just talk about the Bible, and that in this covenant that God is making right here, does God fulfill? Now, who makes the covenant? Let's go back to that idea. Go back to covenant again. And God, who made the covenant? Carla? God did. So God made the covenant. Now then, so who's the only one that can fulfill and then change that covenant? God, because it's his. So when he made that covenant with Abraham, then he passes it down. We always say that, well, Abraham had that one son. No, and then he got remarried, and then he had 6 more, and then he had Ishmael as well. So that's actually 7, 8. So he actually had 8 kids altogether. But how many do we always recognize? We just recognize the one. So the Lord says, there are 2 nations in your womb. 2 people will be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So, God already puts it here. So, we have Jacob and Esau, not Esau and Jacob. God has already put it here. How does he bring this about? Well, by the story that we'll look at, we'll run through here in just a little bit. So God's already got it in place. And I think that that's something that we need to look at, because we overlook that and we think that all this just happened at the time that he ate that bowl of lentil stew. And it's like, no. God's already predicted it right here. God's already said what's going to happen. How does he go about doing that? Then he gives us the rest of the story. But understand, right here is where God puts it. And so, when her days to deliver were fulfilled, first came forth red and all over like a hairy garment. Now, I want you to think with me, because coming back from Texas, as we came up across there, saw a lot of goats and sheep. And I couldn't help but think about this. Martin, you can you imagine putting goat hair skin on so that you'd feel like your brother did? I mean, seriously. And that's what he did. I look at those goats and I'm thinking, a guy was that hairy? But Esau came forth. Now then, Esau was eventually referred to as Edom. Edom is Hebrew for what? Red. He came out of the womb what? Red. He ate lentil stew that was, give me some of that red stuff. Was that not a redneck statement? And that's in quotes as well. I don't know why that one is, but I want some of that red stuff over there. And then they settled in a section of the country south of the Dead Sea, which is noted for its red sandstone cliffs. So the nation of Edom, which came from Esau was red. He ate the lentil, so he picked up the nickname Edom, and you see how that progressed from there. And we look at this then and we go on. One was stronger. The other lived in tents. More civilized, as we would think, I guess, in our way of saying. One outdoor type, one indoor type. 2 kids, 2 different people. And so as they were born, the younger one was holding on to the heel of the firstborn. Now Esau, skillful hunter, Jacob a peaceful man. Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game. Rebekah loved Jacob. You know, I've heard people talk about that. This is wrong. And I understand. And as a parent, I only had one. I think about my mom and dad, and there were 6 of us, and it was like, good grief. But I also understand how things, if you will, quote, evolve. Evolve means to change. When my older brother and I were there, there's 5 years between me and my next brother then, and so on, something like that. We lived on a farm, and in that time frame, people had children to do what? To help work on the farm and different things. And yeah, we did all kinds of things. 3rd grade, I'd go get the cattle in the afternoon, bring them up in the evening, and then gather eggs. You milk in the afternoon. Dad milk in the morning, I milked in the evening, and stuff like that. How many people send your 3rd grader out now? Not only that, but then Martin, I'd drag that tow sack, had feed in it, and take a bucket and dip it out, try to keep the cows out of it, where you sprinkled that in some of the troughs as you went down through there, and then scattered hay. And so was my younger brother, and my youngest brother. He always says, yeah, I was Dad's favorite. It's like, yeah, you knucklehead. He's probably right. But things changed. We no longer lived on a farm. You know, the aspect of that changed in the way that you do things. So these two kids right here, and so consequently, my dad favored me. Let's just be truthful. My dad favored me a little bit more than my older brother, but my mother favored my older brother because he did a lot more things to help her while I was helping my dad. Is that not just realistically just human nature? We try to make an issue out of that, and it's like, no, man, that's just... And so we look at this, and this is what it is. But now then I want you to think about one other thing. What does Rebekah also know? When she asked of God, what did God tell her specifically? The choice has already been made on who's going to serve who. So Rebekah has to keep this, and yet at the same time, Rebekah has to be the mother to both these children as they grow, which I'm sure she did. I never questioned that. I don't think that she was mean to one, and I think, but she favored Jacob, and she knew because what God had told her. Wouldn't that just be human nature?
And certainly facilitated the plan.
Definitely. And he said, definitely facilitated the plan, and that's exactly right. And so we move along there then. And then we have the story. Esau comes in hungry. Please let me, and I love that. Like I said, this is in quotation marks. Please let me have a swallow of that red stuff, for I am famished. Is that not a redneck? Not only was he red in nature, he was a redneck. That's all right. Was Esau going to starve to death? No, because Jesus went how many days without food? 40 days. That's about what you can go, 40 days before you die. Got about that much storage in there and so on. So he wasn't going to die. But Esau was impatient. Okay? Kind of compulsive, we might say, as well. Because what does Jacob say then? He said, first, sell me your birthright. Now then, why do we say Jacob and Esau? Birthright. This is what he passed up. When we go through, even before the flood, they listed Adam, and who did they list? Well, then Seth, because Cain, see, even though being the oldest, he was pushed out. So here's another example of that. But then we have the first son of each individual listed as you go through there. That is the lineage. What does Esau give up in this birthright? Jacob and Esau. So now then, who is listed in the lineage that comes down going all the way to Jesus? When it says that Esau despised his birthright, we're talking about he doesn't understand what he has given up for a bowl of soup. In that regard, when you look at that Jesus Christ being a descendant of yours for a bowl of stew, that would definitely seem like you despised the idea of that birthright. And so the story then continues. Now, I think that it's interesting in this next part, and we talk about this because there's a famine in the land. And so where did Abraham go when there was a famine in the land before? Where did he go? Where? Egypt. He went to Egypt. He went there, went into that delta area of the Nile, some of the most productive land anywhere in the world, even to this day, because of the nutrients from flooding and, and all that kind of good stuff. But God tells him, don't go there. Stay here. But there's a famine. I mean, when a famine, it's like there's we can't get food, we can't. But what does God tell him? You stay here, I'll take care of you. Now he tells him to go to this place Gerar, which is, if you look at it, if you can imagine this now, because we're looking at it here on the map, you got the Dead Sea over here. You got Beersheba at the bottom of it. You got Beersheba over here. And then you got Gaza up here. And about 2/3 of the way from Beersheba to Gaza is where you find this Gerar. So it's near Gaza. And so he tells him that's where he settles. And to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. All right, now where have you heard the name Abimelech before? Back when, dear old dad, when Abraham was there. Is this the same guy? And the answer is no, because Abimelech is a name that they used just like the Egyptians used the name Pharaoh. Was there more than one Pharaoh? And the answer is yeah. Well, Abimelech was the one that they named that the Philistines used in order to talk about their king. So we may see several different Abimelechs. What was it? It was said there that my father is king. Abimelech means my father is king, or my father reigns. So this is what Abimelech, the word Abimelech means. So Abimelech was given, to their king, and it didn't have to wear it, but so when you see this name, don't think that this is the same guy all the way through, but Abimelech represents the king of the Philistines, whoever that may have been at that time. And so he goes there. He sojourned in the land, and I will be with you. This is God talking to Isaac. I will be with you and bless you. For you and your descendants, I will. Okay. Now let's listen to this part, because here we go again. Now he made this covenant with Abraham. Now what's he doing? I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. I will multiply to your descendants as the stars of heaven. I will give your descendants all of these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Now then, why does Isaac get this blessing? We don't ever talk about this. Why did Isaac, we say, well, God promised it to Abraham. Why did Isaac get it? What does it say? Because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Brothers and sisters, had Abraham not fulfilled that agreement, this lineage wouldn't be coming through Isaac. Now do we understand more about why the Jews referred to him as Father Abraham, that stalwart of faith that held on to, kept the commandments, kept the statutes, kept the laws that God gave him. And because of that, then, it was passed to Isaac. People want to talk about a legacy. What kind of legacy did you leave to your son? God tells us what Abraham's legacy was that he left to Isaac. Now then, let me ask a question. Here's the question that goes with this. Does Isaac have to do the same thing that his dad did in order for this to continue and be fulfilled? And the answer to that, you're shaking your head, Mike. What do you say? Yeah. Yeah. He's not going to. We're talking about the legacy that's coming, bringing Jesus Christ, right? And don't get me wrong. There were some real characters in there that we probably would say, well, but. So Isaac has to follow the legacy of his dad in order for this promise to continue with these children. So Isaac lived there. And of course, I'm sure that he heard this story, that it was probably told, among the slaves and the worker servants of Abraham and different things about what his dad did when he was, and telling them that she was his sister and everything else. And of course, Abraham, she was his half-sister, so yeah, we have to go along with that idea because that's just the way it is. But in this case, she wasn't his sister, she was his first cousin once removed. I always said this, if you think about this just a minute seriously, Rebekah and Jacob and Esau were second cousins. Not only was she their mother, but they were also second cousins because they were the descendants of Isaac. So that would, and she was the descendant, and Isaac and Bethuel would have been first cousins. And so Bethuel's children, Rebekah, and Isaac's children would have been second cousins. So Rebekah's children were also her second cousins. I know. When you do this and people start, and it's like they start shaking their head and they're just, but I mean, we can prove it by Scripture that that's what it was. So it's just the way it is. So he tells Abimelech that Rebekah's his sister. Abimelech, of course, and I wonder about this. And of course, people from certain areas, and I know Colleen points this out more than to me, it's like, oh, their skin is just so beautiful. They're, and so I think of that when Colleen talks about someone, and they'll be from another part of the world and so on, and talking about that must have been the idea with Sarah and Rebekah, that being from a different area and that they were a little bit different and just looked upon as being beautiful in that regard. And so he brings her in, and then he sees Rebekah and Isaac, and they're out there, and he's caressing her and everything. And it's like, wait a minute. Now, as weird as the genealogies all seem sometimes and so on, Abimelech saying, that guy wouldn't be doing that if that was his sister, okay? So then he brings him in and says, what are you doing to me? Why have you... Now, my question with that is, and the same thing happened before, are they immoral people? You have to ask that question, don't you? If they were just totally ungodly, immoral. Now, I understand as well that God has got a hand in this, definitely. He's definitely got this whole picture and putting this all together and so on. But at the same time, for Abimelech to even acknowledge that, was this a moral people? So, and I can't just come out and say, yeah, but there was some type of morality there.
At least one monkey didn't mess with another monkey's monkey.
Thank you. Exactly. So we have to look at that aspect of this and understand. And the thing that I wanted to go, then Abimelech calls him in and says, go, get away from us. I wonder if that story had been passed down from the previous Abimelechs of what happened. Because, I mean, things are passed in that regard as you come down, but so he sends him out. But the thing that I wanted to point out right here, so Abimelech charged all the people, don't touch her. Now then, in verse 1, what did it say was going on in the land? Huh? Famine. Boy, can't grow anything. Did God tell Isaac, I'll be with you? Come down to verse 12 in chapter 26, and what does he say? Now Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. So for every bushel of wheat that he planted, he got 100 bushels back. In a famine. That's a pretty good return, you know.
That doesn't go unnoticed.
And it didn't go unnoticed. All right? So, goes back to what God had said. Did God say, I will bless you and take care of you? And the answer is yes. And if that's not proof enough, then I can't help you. All right? So Isaac gets his wife back. God blesses him with food. And so we begin to look at this. And like I said, I wanted to there were some things that I just wanted to point out a little bit. And hopefully I didn't rehash the same things over and over again. Tried to pull a few things that were a little bit different out of there. And it's time to quit right here. Do I have any questions or comments before we go right here? All right, I want to give a quick update. I didn't check, but on Thursday, I think it was, Jerry, wasn't that right, that little Jeremiah had an issue, and he threw up some blood when they were feeding, and so they had to take him back and work with him, but he is better now. I was headed up there Thursday, and they'd already left the hospital, so I didn't go up Thursday afternoon, but Derek had been in contact with Jerry, and so we wanted to pass that along. So please keep him in your prayers as he goes through this process of trying to.
Parents are here this morning. He's at 5 pounds.
He's at 5 pounds. That is great.
He's doing well this morning.
All right, great. So we're so thankful for that. So continue to keep Jeremiah and that whole family in your prayers as well. All right. Thank you again, and again, thank you for all of your prayers and cards and concern, and let us get ready now to worship our God together.